Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel on Mirz Hashem today. We will be learning Daf Nun Ches Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on the very close to the bottom, 2 lines off the bottom of Nun Ches Amid Aleph, near the end of Siman Reish Ayin Zayin Sif Gimel. Indeed, very close to the end of Siman Reish Ayin Zayin. Hopefully, we will complete Siman Reish Ayin Zayin today and begin Siman Reish Ayin Ches. So we just have a drop of unfinished business over here at the end of Sif Gimel with the Ramah. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Tzvi ben Leah Miriam. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael. Hanesunim batzaro ba'ashivya ha'imdim bein bayom ubein bayabasha ha'makim yirachem aleihem v'yetziam yitzaro l'rvacha me'afelu la'ira u'mishibud l'geula hashta ba'gala u'bizman kariv v'naymar armein. Our learning should also be a schus refuah shalema for Daniel ben Naomi. And our learning should be a schus for Yisrael ben Rachel, Yonasan ben Michal, Yoel ben Michal. The Rebbeinu Shem should watch over them. The Rebbeinu Shem should watch over all of our brothers and sisters in harm's way. B'chol makom shehem. Okay, so over here in Siman Reish Ayin Zayin Sif Gimel, we spoke at length about the isser of a basis l'davar ha'asr, something that is serving as a support for a davar ha'asr. So you have a table, which is completely a davar hamuter. A table is not muktzah, but it's supporting neros. It's supporting candlesticks that have a candle or an oil lamp on them. So that is a davar aser. That's muktzah. The table is a basis l'davar aser. It's supporting something which is aser, and therefore the basis itself becomes aser. And therefore we had this halacha here in Sif Gimel, where if you have candlesticks on top of a table or some type of other support, if you put those candlesticks on the table with intent that those candlesticks should be there on Shabbos, then the table itself is going to become muktzah because it's a basis l'davar ha'aser, unless you put a davar hamuter like the chalas or a sefer or something on the table as well. That would make the table into a basis l'davar ha'aser and also davar hamuter. If the davar hamuter is more valuable, so to speak, than the davar ha'aser, then the table is not muktzah. And we went into this in detail yesterday. I can't give a recap of all the details that we discussed yesterday, but that's the halacha that we saw. Now, the Ramah comes 2 lines off the bottom here on Nun Ches Amid Aleph, and the Ramah says the following: Haga, umikol makom. Nevertheless, even if you have a case where the table is a basis l'davar ha'aser, muter liga betavla, you're allowed to touch the table, and this doesn't only apply to a table. Let's say in what's probably the most common case that we have nowadays. You have the Shabbos Leichter, and the Shabbos Leichter are on a tray. And the tray is on a table. And you put chalas on the table as well. So the table is not a basis l'davar ha'aser, because the table is serving a davar ha'aser and a davar hamuter. So the table is fine. The table is not a basis. But the tray is a basis l'davar ha'aser. Assuming that the only thing that's on the tray is the leichter, so then the tray is subservient to the leichter, and therefore the tray is a basis l'davar ha'aser, and the tray is muktzah. Fine, you're not allowed to move the tray. But says the Ramah, you're allowed to touch the tray, and says the Ramah like this: Mikamoka muta liga b'tavla, you're allowed to touch the tavla that's a basis l'davar ha'aser. Why? Hayol ve'enoi metaltal haner. Because when you touch the tavla, you're not moving the ner. That's how you translate the words of the Ramah. Now, this Ramah is very problematic, because the truth is, the reason you're allowed to touch the tray is because there is no isser of touching muktzah. That's a mistake that many people make. Many people think you're not allowed to touch muktzah. That's not really true. The isser of muktzah is an isser tiltul. You're not allowed to move muktzah. You're allowed to touch muktzah. Now, there are some things, and we'll discuss one of them shortly, there are some times where you do have an issue where the slightest touch will move the muktzah. So we're going to discuss shortly. Let's say you have some type of a candelabra that's suspended. It's hanging from the ceiling, and the slightest touch will make it swing. So, okay, over there you may have a problem of touching it because touching it equals moving it. But when you're talking about a table or you're talking about a leichter tray, touching the tray is not going to move the tray. So really, the reason why it's mutter to touch the tavla over here is because you're not moving the tavla, not because you're not moving the nair. And indeed, the Bir Halacha points this out. The Bir Halacha in Dibra Maskil, Hoil ve'enoi metaltel haner. The Ramah says you're allowed to touch the tavla because when you touch the tavla, you're not moving the nair, the flame. Says the Chavetz Chaim, haloshen dachuk. The lashon over here in the Ramah is very dachuk. It's very difficult to understand. Taharei hi basis, because the tavla itself is a basis. V'tiltula gamkein aser. Moving the tray would be aser. V'ikra heter, the heter over here to touch the tavla is mishum degama tavla eina mistalteles. Because when you touch the tavla, you're not going to move the tavla. So that's really what the Ramah should have said, says the Chavetz Chaim. What the Ramah should have said was, mutter liga b'tavla, you're allowed to touch the tavla, hoyel ve'enoi metaltel oisa. Since by touching the tavla, you're not going to move the tavla. Why does the Ramah say that it's mutter because by touching the tavla, you're not going to move the nair? And the Chavetz Chaim doesn't really have an answer to this question. In the Bir Halacha over there, throws out a possible teretz, but he's very unhappy with it. Others want to suggest that maybe what the Ramah means is like this. Let's remember, why is the tavla aser? The reason the tavla is aser is because it's a basis l'davar aser. What's the davar aser? The davar aser is the nair. So the whole iser over here comes, it flows out of the nair. Remember what we said yesterday. We're going to see it again hopefully later today. In the scenario that we're talking about here, we have a burning nair on a candlestick. What's happening here? The flame is what's muktzah, and then everything beneath the flame are a basis. Everything, the glass is a basis to the oil, which is a basis to the wick, which is a basis to the flame. The silver candlestick is a basis to the glass. The tray is a basis to the candlestick. But the whole iser over here flows out of the nair. That's the ikar muktzah over here, is the nair. Maybe that's what the Ramah means, that it's okay to touch the tavla, nair, because by touching the tavla, you're not moving the nair or any of the muktzah items that became muktzah machmas the nair. I don't know. It's a little dach. Okay, continues the Ramah. V'hu adin, the same way I'm telling you that you're allowed to touch the tavla, v'hu adin, shemuter liga b'menorah shebebeis hakneses. You're also allowed to touch the menorah in the shul. Nowadays, we have a menorah on the amid, and it has electric bulbs in it. Back in his day, they had a candelabrum, I guess, by the amid or somewhere else in the shul, and it had lichtalach, it had neiros on it. Says the Ramah, you're allowed to touch that menorah, v'haneiros dolkal alav, even though there are burning neiros on it. U'bilvad shelo yinanea, as long as you don't move it. As long as you don't move it, you haven't transgressed the iser of muktzah, because muktzah is an iser tiltal, not an iser negia. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois cut your test, b'menorah shebebeis hakneses. The Chavetz Chaim qualifies this a little bit. He says, Hainu b'kavua al makom echad. When the Ramah says you're allowed to touch this menorah shebebeis hakneses, it's referring to a menorah that's fixed in place. Avalim hi teluya, but if it's a suspended menorah, then afilu liga ba'aser. Then even touching a suspended menorah is aser shebekal yinanea, because by simply touching it, you're going to move it. And this is true even after the neiros go out, and hopefully we will see that. I don't think we'll see it later in today's share. We'll discuss that in tomorrow's share. Even after the neiros go out, the menorah is still aser. Why? Because the menorah was aser ben hashmashas when Shabbos came in, because then it was supporting lit neiros, and migudis katsoy le ben hashmashas is katsoy lekol hayuma. Ken mashma mi magen avram le'el b'sim reis samachei v'chen me'ataz b'sif kat vav v'chen mashma me'amardechai demari b'kavua. From all of these sources, we see that the Ramah over here is referring to a menorah that's fixed in place. That's what you're allowed to touch. In the Biur Halacha that we referenced earlier, he does bring down an Or Zarua who says that touching a suspended menorah would not be the Isser of Muktzah, it would be Tiltul min Hatzad. That's what the Or Zarua wants to say, but that's a matter of great dispute. Okay, continuing on now to Sif Daled, top line, Nun Ches Amid Beis. Says the Mechaber, Mutar lahaniach ner shel Shabbos mi ba'od yom al gabe ilon. You're allowed to place a candlestick, you're allowed to place neris on a tree on Erev Shabbos and light them and leave them on the tree for Shabbos. The lekala mechash, because we don't have to be concerned, the lekishayivche, that when the neris go out, lishkale minei, you're going to come to remove the candlesticks from upon the tree, v'nimtza mishtamish b'mechuber, and by doing so, you will be making use of a tree, which is something that is mechuber l'karka. What's going on over here? So we know that there is an Isser D'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to be mishtamish be'ilon. You're not allowed to use a tree on Shabbos. What does that mean, to use a tree? Well, one example of using a tree would be, let's say your kids go outside to the backyard on Shabbos afternoon, and they want to play some ball in the backyard on Shabbos afternoon, and the basketball, or the whatever ball it is stuck up inside the tree. So now, even if they don't have to climb the tree, let's say they just have to reach their hand up and pull the ball off the tree, you're not allowed to take something off of a tree on Shabbos. Why? What's the problem? This is Gzera D'Rabbanan. What's the Gzera? The Gzera is the Chachamim were afraid that if you're going to come into contact with the tree on Shabbos, if you're going to use the tree on Shabbos, then you might come to break something off the tree. You might come to break a branch off the tree to use it for something. You might come to pull an apple off the tree. Whatever it is, you might pull something off the tree. And pulling something off the tree would be the Issur Daraisa of Kaitzer, of harvesting. So in order to protect against that, the Chazal said you're not allowed to use a tree on Shabbos. So you're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos. You're not allowed to hang things on a tree on Shabbos. You're also not allowed to remove things off the tree on Shabbos. That's why the Mechaber comes here in Sif Daled, and the Mechaber says, you know what you are allowed to do? You would be allowed to light your Shabbos neris, or any other neris that you're going to have lit for Shabbos. You're allowed to light neris for Shabbos and put them on the tree. Let's say you want to eat the Shabbos food outside in the backyard, and you have an appropriately shaped tree. Somehow there's a surface, maybe there's a big wide branch, and there's a nice surface over there where you could perch a tray, and you could put leichter on there, and you could leave the leichter on the tree on Shabbos. Says the Mechaber, that would be okay. You know why? Because we're not afraid that later on, let's say Shabbos morning, you're going to go outside to the backyard, and the licht have gone out already, and you're going to say, okay, the licht are out, let me take the neris off the tree and bring them into the house. We're not afraid that that's going to happen. Why are we not afraid that that's going to happen? Because we're going to see tomorrow, Mirz Hashem, that neris that were burning on Shabbos, when you have candlesticks that had neris in them that were burning at the outset of Shabbos, they remain muktzah for the entirety of Shabbos. Even after the neris go out, you're not allowed to handle the neris. So therefore, we're not afraid that you're going to come to take them off the tree because they're muktzah. So we're not worried that you're going to come to be mishtamesh be'ilan. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut and chaf. The lekala mechash ta kaimelon, because we paskin the ner sheidliku by Baisa Shabbos, that neris that you lit that were burning on Shabbos also lotaltaloi afilu la'achar shekava. They continue to be muktzah for the entire Shabbos even after they go out. Ukidlakamon b'siman reish ayin tes, like we're going to see shortly in Siman reish ayin tes. Now there's an interesting wrong sefer. There's an interesting Dirshu footnote over here. Dirshu footnote number 42. What do we see over here from this Mechaber? The Mechaber is telling me you're allowed to put the neris on the tree on Erev Shabbos and leave them there going into Shabbos. Why? Because we're not concerned that you might come to take them off the tree. Why? Because they're muktzah. And they remain muktzah even after the candles go out. So we're not afraid that you're going to come to take the candlesticks off the tree because they're muktzah for the entirety of Shabbos. Okay, what could we infer from there? Well, if you look in the footnote here, number 42, it writes, V'achein, however, legabi kelim hamutarim lishimush b'Shabbos. But let's say you're dealing with other kinds of kelim that are not muktzah on Shabbos. So let's say you have a nice pitcher, and you want to perch a pitcher on the tree on Erev Shabbos. Now, the pitcher is not muktzah on Shabbos, so do we have to be afraid that you might come Shabbos afternoon and say, oh, I need a pitcher for some ice-cold water, so I'm going to take the pitcher off the tree and I'm going to come to be mishtamish be'ilan? Well, Kasav l'kamon simin shin lamed vav sivkat yud beis, we're going to see later on, Mirz Hashem, she'aser lahanicham al ilan be'erev Shabbos. Kalim that are not muktzah on Shabbos, you're not allowed to put on a tree on Erev Shabbos. Shemitoishu mishtamish behem tamid. This is the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch later on in Siman Shin Lamed Vav. Mitoishu mishtamish behem tamid. If these are kalim that you use on a constant basis, yesh lachu shema yavai lahi ridam b'Shabbos me'elon. We have to be concerned that you might come to take it off the tree on Shabbos, and you'll be over on the Yisad Rabbanan of being mishtamish be'ilan. However, omnam, and here you get a window into how a Pesach, a gadol, thinks. Omnam, das agoyin Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal, shahainu dafka b'kelim sherigilim lehishtamish behem tamid. This is only true by kelim of a type that you use on a consistent basis. Oy kigoy ner, or something like a ner, sheha'odam nena mimenu b'Shabbos v'yamtiv, shebehem yesh lachu sheyitlei me'ilan. The only time that we have this isser, that you're not allowed to put something on a tree on Erev Shabbos because of the fear that you might remove it from the tree on Shabbos and be over in Issa D'Rabbanan, that's only by things, kalim, of a type that you use on a consistent basis. But if you have a type of a keli that you don't use very often, and the truth is that you really have no thought at all of using it on Shabbos, you're allowed to leave it on the tree. We don't find a sifkat in the Shulchan Aruch anywhere that says on Erev Shabbos you're not allowed to hang a basket on a tree. You know why? Because we can't let you have a basket hanging on a tree on Shabbos. Maybe on Shabbos afternoon you'll take it off the tree and you'll be over this D'Rabbanan being mishtamish be'ilan. We don't find anywhere that it says that. Do we find a sifkat in Shulchan Aruch that says anywhere, Erev Shabbos, one of the things that you have to do on Erev Shabbos is, if you have any kalim on a tree, you have to take them off. Why? Because we're chayshish that if not, on Shabbos you might come to take the keli off the tree. We don't find that anywhere. So you see that the Chacham did not really have such a strong chash, such a strong concern, that if you have kalim on a tree on Shabbos, you're going to come to take them off on Shabbos. Elamai, Reb Shlomo Zalman says, this only applies to kalim that you use all the time, where it's the type of thing that you're going to be in your house and you're going to say, oh, where's that pitcher? Oh, I left it on the tree on Erev Shabbos. Let me go get it. That's when you have a problem. But you don't have a problem. So, for example, I actually knew somebody who had a barbecue grill in his backyard. And next to his barbecue grill, he hung on the tree the kalim for the barbecue. So he had his brush that he uses to clean the grill. He had the tongs that he uses to flip the burgers. And he had a spatula that he uses to flip things on the grill. And he had them hanging on a tree, but he only uses them by the grill. He only uses them when he grills. He has other spatulas in the house if he's frying latkes in the house. These are for the grill, and he leaves them hanging on the tree next to the grill. Is he not allowed to leave them on the tree? Does he have to make sure every Erev Shabbos that I got to remember, I got to go outside, I got to take the spatula off the tree? No. How come we're not afraid that he might come to take it off the tree on Shabbos? Because that's a spatula for the grill, and you don't grill on Shabbos. So that's fine. The only time there's a concern is when it's a type of keli that you use often, and it's something that you would use on Shabbos. So a good example of that, I think, would be, let's say you had something going on in the backyard on Erev Shabbos, and you brought out a couple of pitchers, and you needed a place to stash them, so you stashed them on a tree. That could be a problem, because that's the kind of thing that you on Shabbos, you might come to take it off the tree. Shabbos for the Suda, Shabbos by day, you want to put out a pitcher of cold water. You might go to take it off the tree. So that's a problem. That's the type of keli that you can't leave on the tree on Erev Shabbos. Okay. Going weiter. All right. So we saw over here the first halacha of Sif Daled, which was you're allowed to leave the neiros. You could light neiros on Erev Shabbos, and you could leave them on the tree. And we're not afraid that on Shabbos you might come to take them off the tree and be mishtamish be'ilan. Why not? Because the neiros hamuktzah for all Shabbos. So you're not going to take them off the tree on Shabbos. Says the Mechaber, second line down, middle of the line, however, ein manichid ner shel Yom Tov al gabi ilan. But you can't put your neiros for Yom Tov on a tree, to shakal u'monachle, because neiros aren't muktzah on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, you could use neiros. You're allowed to make a fire. You're allowed to, you could take the burning nair and you could use it to light something else on Yom Tov. So on Yom Tov, a nair is not muktzah. So now, if you light neiros on Erev Yom Tov and you put them on the tree, you might come Yom Tov to come take the neiros off the tree. And the same way you're not allowed to take something off a tree on Shabbos, you're not allowed to take something off a tree on Yom Tov. That would be a problem. V'nimtza b'shtamesh be'ilan. Says the Mishnah Berurah Chaf Aleph, aval ein manichid ritzayin loymar. What the Mechaber means to say, obviously, is afilu hanichai me Erev Yom Tov. You can't light neiros and leave them on a tree on Erev Yom Tov, because you might come to remove them on Yom Tov. Ukidla kamon b'sim tafkuf yudalid sif vav. Okay, turning to the last sif over here in Siman Reish Ayin Zayin, sif hey. Motor lichbais ka'ara al gabe haner b'Shabbos. You're allowed to overturn a bowl or some kind of keli on top of a lit nair on Shabbos. Now, of course, the Mishnah Berurah is going to point out that you could only do this if you leave it a crack open so that air could get in and you're not going to suffocate and extinguish the nair. You're not allowed to extinguish an air. But you're allowed to position some kind of a keli over a nair on Shabbos if you do it in such a way that you're not going to extinguish the nair. You might want to do this. Let's say you have a burning nair and you're afraid it's a little too close to the beam, the wooden beam of the house. That's a kaira. A kaira is a beam. So why are you doing this? You're doing it to protect the kaira. You're doing it to protect the ceiling. That's why you're doing it. So you're taking this bowl and you're positioning it over the nair. And again, you're making sure that you don't suffocate and extinguish the nair. Says the Mechaber, you're allowed to do this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ka'ara, says the Mishnah Berurah, we have to be speaking over here about a Ka'ara shel cheres. We must be talking about an earthenware keli. Aval shel matchis aser. You would not be allowed to do this if the keli is metal. Why? Ki hamechamamai, because somebody who heats up a metal keli, chayev mishum mavir. When you heat up a metal keli, it depends how hot you make it. If you heat up a metal keli to the point that it gets soft, that's bishul. If you heat up a metal keli to the extent where it glows, that's mavir. That's called, because it's like you're creating a coal. You're creating something that's glowing hot. That's the isser of mavir. That's the isser of making a fire. So what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is like this. The Mechaber said you could put a keli over a fire in order to protect the beam, the wooden beam that's overhead, so it shouldn't catch fire. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you can't do this with a metal keli, because if you do it with a metal keli, if it gets really hot, you're going to be over because of mavir, if it gets red hot. If it doesn't get red hot, but it gets soft, which is also very hot, it's going to be bishul. So you can't really do this with a metal keli. Then the Mishnah Berurah points out, But if there's a real chash sakana over here, if you see a situation where the fire is burning to the extent where you're really afraid it's going to catch the house on fire, then you could do whatever you need to do. Mutter b'chal gavna, you could do whatever you do. Now, there's a lot to talk about over here, but let's go weiter first. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Chav Gimel, the Mechaber said, why are you doing this? You're doing this to protect that the wooden beam should not catch fire. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kidei, V'afal gav the noitel akli l'tzarech HaTorah. In other words, the Mishnah Berurah is addressing over here, what exactly is the chiddush of the Mechaber? You're taking a bowl. Is a bowl muktzah? No. You're putting it on top of an air. Now, you're putting it on top of an air in a manner where you're not going to extinguish the air. So, what have you done? You took a bowl that's not muktzah, you positioned it over an air, and you did not affect the air. You didn't do kibui. So, what's the problem? Why is there a chiddush over here in the Mechaber that you're allowed to do this? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, the chiddush is the beam of the house is muktzah. If there was a way for you to move the beam of the house, you wouldn't be allowed to. It's muktzah. Why is it muktzah? It's part of a structure that's mechubal karka. It has no purpose on Shabbos. You're not allowed to move that. That would be muktzah. So you're moving a non-muktzah bowl, but you're not moving it for the needs of the bowl. You're moving it for the needs of something else, which is muktzah. Now, there's a shita that holds that you're not allowed to do that. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's what the Mechaber is telling me here, that we paskin that this is mutter. Even though you're moving this keli, the bowl, for the needs of the kaira, and the kaira is muktzah, the kaira is something that ain't any telos b'Shabbos, you're not allowed to move on Shabbos. Kaimalon, we paskin the kli nitol that you're allowed to move a keli, even if you're doing it for the purposes of something which is muktzah, ukidlakaman b'simin shinyud sif vav. Ois kotlachav dalid. The Mechaber's case was you're doing this to protect the beam from catching fire. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there are other reasons why you might want to do this. Maybe you're doing it because this nair is in your bedroom and you want to go to sleep and the light is disturbing you. So you want to position the bowl over the nair so that it should block the light and you should be able to sleep. Or maybe you have another reason why you want to do this. You're allowed to do it. However, you must take care. You have to leave airspace between the keli and the nair. What he means is, you need to position it in such a way that the nair, the flame, is going to be able to draw air. If you do it in a way, if you mamish close it off, now the nair can't draw air, you're putting out the fire. That's what you're going to do. This is like the halacha that we learned earlier, I think it was in Reish Nun Tes, that you're not allowed to close an oven door completely because you'll suffocate the flame. So that you're certainly not allowed to do. Now, there's one thing that I want to speak about here, a drop, and that is this Mishnah Berurah that said that you're not allowed to put a metal bowl over the nair. Why? Because if you put a metal bowl over the nair and it gets hot, you're going to be over Misham Mavir. You're going to be over Nisa Daraisa of Mavir. Okay. Does that mean that you're never allowed to take something that's metal and put it near a heat source? Because making metal hot is an Isser of Mavir? Now, wait a second. I'll tell you right away that can't be. Because we learned earlier, and this has practical applications nowadays, you're allowed to take a pot, an empty pot, and position it over a fire, and then put food on top of it to heat up that food. That's the halakha that we learned earlier when we were learning about the halachas of hatmana. And I'll give you a very practical application that people do all the time nowadays. You have a blech. People take a 9 by 13 tin, they put it upside down on the blech over the fire, and then they take food and put it on top of that overturned 9 by 13 tin in order to warm it up. So let's say you want to warm up your chalas for the Shabbos Day Suda, right? So you take an 9 by 13, you overturn it on the blech, and now you take your chalas and you put it onto the overturned 9 by 13 tin and you heat up your chalas. You're allowed to do that. Now the 9 by 13 tin is metal and you're putting it on the blech over a heat source. It's going to get hot. Tell them you're not allowed to do that? That's mavir? So if you take a look in the Dirshu footnote, number 44, in the first paragraph, they bring down a sheet of the Chazon Ish. The sheet of the Chazon Ish is very machmir. The Chazon Ish said that really, when are you over the Issa Daraisa of Mavir? Only if you make the metal keli hot to the degree that it starts to glow. That's when you're over the Issa Daraisa of Mavir. But the Chazon Ish says, as long as you make it hot, even if you make it less hot than that, it's still otzer because it's chatzi shir. And that even might be an Issa Daraisa, chatzi shir otzer min HaTorah. So the Chazon Ish is very, very machmir. However, other shittas say not like this at all. Rabbi Yashiv says not. He says that clearly we learned earlier that you're allowed to put a metal pot over the fire, like I said. So he says, this Isser that the Mishnah Berurah is talking about over here, that you can't overturn the metal bowl over the nair, the reason the Chavetz Chaim says you can't do that is because generally speaking, in that case, you're putting the metal bowl into very close contact with the nair. In other words, the common application of the case that we're talking about here is you have a nair that has a flame, and you're going to take a small bowl and you're going to position it on top of the nair. We're not thinking that the person has a nair and he's going to go get a 60-gallon pot and overturn it on top of the nair. He's going to get a small metal bowl and put it on top of the nair. So the metal bowl is going to be in very close contact with the flame, and it's going to get taka extremely hot. That's when the Mishnah Berurah is concerned. You might taka come, or at least come very close to being over on Issa Daraisa. But if you have a chance to look at this Dirshu footnote number 44, it's very interesting. And he writes over here in the last paragraph of the footnote. It starts on the last line of the first column. V'chein koser b'shalos teshuvas igros Moshe. The Rishivas Zatzal, Rav Moshe Zechariah v'Kadosh Levracha writes, Shemuter l'niach pacha osi mimatchis al gabi ha'esh. You're allowed to put a tin over the fire, ba'ofen shaloi tislabein hamatchis, as long as it's not going to start glowing. I don't think anybody ever took an 9x13 tin and put it on the black and found it glowing with heat. Now, he stresses it has to be that it's not going to get to the degree of heat where it's going to glow, even if you leave it there all day. But, okay. Let's move on to Siman Reish Ayin Ches. Siman Reish Ayin Ches is a one-sif Siman, one short line, but it's a fascinating little piece of Mechaber and some fascinating Mishnah Berurah. Let's see how much of it we can get done. Siman Reish Ayin Ches sheyachal lechabes haner b'shvil hachayla. The halach is that you are allowed to extinguish a ner. You could put a fire out b'shvil hachayla on behalf of a chayla, of an ill individual. We're going to see it's talking about a chayla sheyesh by sakana, somebody who's really in sakonas nefashis. You're allowed to put out an ner. Uboy sif echad, in here we have one sif, says the Mechaber sif aleph, mutter lechabes haner, you're allowed to extinguish an ner, b'shvil sheyishan hachayla sheyesh by sakana, so that a chayla sheyesh by sakana should be able to sleep. So you have a nebuch, a chayla sheyesh by sakana, an ill person who's mamish in danger of his life, and he's in the room, and there's a ner, and the chayla needs to sleep, and the ner is stopping him from sleeping, you're allowed to put out the ner. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Mutter. Ein barambam bepirush hamishnayis. Take a look at what the Rambam writes in the Pirush Hamishnayis. Shekosav. He writes over there, Dedafka b'shei efshel lohoitzi achayla lamakam acher. This is only true if you have no other eitzah. If you could relocate the chayla, now obviously it means that you could relocate the chayla without without denigrating the condition of the chayla. If you might risk harm to the chayla, if you have a chayla sheish by sakana, just moving him could put him in a sakana. So if this is in any way going to harm the chayla, or if you don't have a proper place to put him, if you need him in the room that he's in because that's the environment that he needs, and that's where he has the IV and everything else, so then you're not going to say, oh, well, I can move the chayla to the other room. No, that's called you can't move the chayla. But the Rambam says, if you could reposition the chayla, if you could relocate the chayla without any harm to the chayla, so of course you should do that before you should extinguish a fire on Shabbos. So Ayin Baramba bePirush Hamishnayis shekasav dedafka b'sheyev shalohoitzi achayla lamakam acher oy lahastira armi menu, or maybe there's a way to cover the nair, or somehow put up a mechitza between the nair and the chayla. So if there's another way out without performing the Isser of Mechabe, certainly you should take that path. Or it's Tzayna Loimar, what the Rambam means to say is, maybe like we just learned, maybe you could put a bowl on top of the flame, and therefore it won't disturb the chayla. So if there's an easier way out in halacha, rather do that before you're going to go mamish extinguish a fire on Shabbos. Siman. Or maybe you could take the nair and put the nair into another room. Moving the nair could only entail an isser of muktzah. Even if it's an oil lamp, if you move it very gently so that you don't risk directing the oil to the wick or directing the oil away from the wick, right? So then all you're doing is an Isser Muktzah. Better you should be over on the Isser Muktzah than you should go extinguish the fire. So if there's any better way out, certainly you should do that. The Ilav Haki Bavada Yosef Tevel Tata Muktzah Milav Lisser Kviya V'ayin Bebiar Halacha. Ois cut and base Lechaba Is Haner. The Mechaber says you could put out a fire because of this chayla. Okay. Ukeshayok Yitzachakach. Now what happens if you put out the nair for the chayla? Beautiful. Now the chayla goes to sleep. Now the chayla wakes up in the middle of the night, and the chayla needs light. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kishayok Yitzachakach. When the chayla wakes up later, mutter lidloi kaner b'shviloi. You could go light an air for him. You could do the Issa Daraisa of Mavir. You could go light a flame for him. Why? Because we're talking about a chayla sheyesh by sakana. A chayla sheyesh by sakana is pekuach nefesh. Ubechol zeh, im eini Yehudi mezunah lefanav, le'efshal lasis al yadoi, beli ichur yas al yadoi. In all of these cases, obviously, if there's an eino Yehudi aid that's available, if you have an eino Yehudi there who could do these things instead of Yisrael, so the eino Yehudi should do it. If the eino Yehudi is going to do it with the same level of alacrity and urgency as the Yisrael, if there's any risk that the eino Yehudi is going to delay, or the eino Yehudi is going to take his time, he's not going to do it as well, then a Yisrael should do it, because we're talking about a chayla sheyesh by sakana. Ois cut gimel. Hachayla sheyesh by sakana shepikuach nefesh doiche Shabbos, because as we all know, pikuach nefesh is doiche Shabbos, and therefore, if the chayla sheyesh by sakana needs you to put out a fire, you put out a fire. If the chayla sheyesh by sakana needs you to make a fire, you make a fire. Ukidla kaman b'simin shin chav ches. I had this nebuch. I had this when my father, Ol Shalom, Rabbi Tzvi ben Rameir, Ol Shalom, the Shama should have an aliyah, when he was very, very ill and he was a chayla sheyesh by sakana. There was a time that I had to turn off the air conditioner on Shabbos. He needed the air conditioner off on Shabbos. It was the middle of the night, in the dead of the night. There was no eino Yehudi. There was nothing else. He needed that air conditioner turned off. I turned off the air conditioner. And later he needed it turned on, and I turned it on. Says the Mishnah Berurah, so too, if you're stuck out in the wild somewhere, or you're in an unsafe place, and there are bandits roaming around, and it's takas hakanas tefashis, you're afraid that if they know you're there, chas v'chalila, they might kill you. So in that case, if you have no way to block the light from an air, you're allowed to put that nair out, because again, it's pekuach nefesh. Okay, so what have we seen here so far? We saw what seems to be a very basic halacha. If you have a chayla sheyesh by sakana, and he needs you to put out an air, you're allowed to put out the air. If he needs you to light an air, you're allowed to light an air. If you're in a dangerous situation, and you have to make sure that you remain hidden, if somebody sees you, if somebody finds out that you're there, they might kill you, and you have an air burning, and you need to put that light out, you could put the light out, because it's sakanas nefashos. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah like this. The Achrayim write, let's say you have a chayla, and you really have a suffix. You don't know. Is this chayla called a chayla sheyesh by sakana? And this happens, by the way. You know, you have sometimes critically ill people. Nebuch, somebody is very, very ill. Nebuch lo aleinu, no one should know from it. Someone's very, very ill with stage 4 cancer of some kind, and he's undergoing therapies and everything else. And somebody will say, is Yechol Sheyesh by Sakana? Well, it was by the doctor yesterday. The doctor said, you know, he's doing pretty well, and this and that. Yeah, but Very often you hear about such people who have such diseases, and Nebuch, yesterday you heard that he was doing quite well, and the next day he's not here anymore. So, Cholish Yesh by Sakana, sometimes people think, Cholish Yesh by Sakana means Mamsh, a guy who has a death rattle. No, that's a Geisis, not a Cholish Yesh by Sakana. Cholish Yesh by Sakana means a Chol who's in danger. Somebody who's critically ill is a Chol that's in danger. But, says the Mishnah Berurah over here, that the Huadin Bishvel Cholish who's suffix Sakana. Even if you're not 100% clear, but it's a suffix Sakana, guess what? You're allowed to extinguish an air for a chayla that's a suffix sakana also. And we're going to learn this later. We should learn it together. I think it's Siman Shin Chav Ches, that if you have a building collapsed and you have a suffix, is there a yid trapped under there? Did he manage to get out in time, or is he under the collapse? Is he still alive, or is he dead? These are sfeikas, right? So, am I allowed to go be over Isuri Daraisa on Shabbos? Is it for sure Pekuach Nefesh? I don't know. It's a suffix. The Mechaber writes very clearly, yes, you're allowed to be over on all Isurim, even though this sveikim harbe, even though we're dealing with a lot of sveikas. Doesn't matter. So, therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasra Achreinim Yachreinim, right? To Adin Bishvel HaCholish suffix sakana. Gam Kem Oto Lechablis. Aval, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, B'shvil chayla she'ein by sakana, if you're dealing with a chayla she'ein by sakana, somebody's got a virus, somebody he's running a fever, it's a chayla she'ein by sakana, also lechabis l'kulei alma. Everybody agrees you're not allowed to put out a fire for a chayla she'ein by sakana. Va'afilu la'paiskim disvirlu, even according to those paiskim, this is probably referring to the famous Shitas Reb Shimon. That is extinguishing a fire is usually not an Issa Daraisa. Why not? Because extinguishing a fire is considered a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. We'll get to that in a moment. It still would be asa b'drabanan. What this means is like this. When you extinguish a fire, in the vast majority of cases, when you extinguish a fire, why are you extinguishing the fire? You're usually doing it either to prevent something from happening or to remove a nuisance. So, for example, if it's light in a room and you need the room to be dark, which is our case, you have an ill individual who's trying to sleep. You have a fire. The light is disturbing the ill individual. You want to extinguish the fire. Are you extinguishing the fire for the sake of putting out, there's something that you want to accomplish that you could only accomplish by putting out the fire? No. You want the absence of light. You're not doing it to create something. You're doing it to remove the light. Let's contrast this to the case that the Gemara speaks about, where extinguishing a fire is considered a malacha shetzricha legufa. You know what that is? You want to make a coal. How do you make a coal? You take wood, you make a smoldering fire, and you allow the wood to burn slowly, and then you extinguish it. You have now created a coal. In that case, why did you do the extinguishing? You did the extinguishing in order to create a coal. That's a malacha shetzricha legufa. You needed that malacha in order to create your coal. Putting out a fire to remove light is not a malacha shetzricha legufa. You just want to get rid of the fire. So 9 cases out of 10, the malacha of kibui, the malacha of extinguishing, is a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. Now Reb Shimon, famous machlokes Reb Shimon and Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon in the Gemara holds that a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa is only an issa d'Rabbanan, not an issa d'Oraisa. In that case, in the Mishnah Berurah over here, we're discussing putting out a fire, which is a malacha she'ena tzricha legufa. It's only an issa d'Rabbanan, on behalf of a chayla she'ein boi sakana. Now, there are times that you're allowed to do an issa d'Rabbanan, even for a chayla she'ein boi sakana. So, for example, Amir la'akum. Amir la'akum is an issa d'Rabbanan. You're allowed to do Amir la'akum on behalf of a chayla she'ein by sakana. But that's because Amir la'akum is considered a lower level issa d'Rabbanan because it's an issa she'ein by maisa. You're not actually doing something. The malacha of kivui, even when it's a malacha she'ein tzrich legufa, is a very high level issa d'Rabbanan. Why? Because the act of extinguishing is exactly the same, whether it's malacha shetzricha legufa or ein tzricha legufa. What do I mean? The same way you extinguish a burning piece of wood in order to create a coal, which is a malacha shetzricha legufa, that's the same exact way you extinguish a fire when you want to make it dark in the room so an ill person should sleep. So the etzem malacha, the act that you're going to do, is exactly the same. And therefore, the Isser D'Rabbanan of Mechabe, when it's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, is considered a very high level Isser D'Araisa. And therefore, the Mishnah Berurah says over here that you're not allowed to do kivui, you're not allowed to extinguish a fire, even according to Reb Shimon, that extinguishing a fire for a sick person is only a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, and it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. You're still not allowed to do it for a chayla she'ein by sakana, and the Mishnah Berurah says here that that's l'kulei alma. Everybody agrees that you're not allowed to put out a fire for a chayla she'ein by sakana, even though it's only an issa d'Rabbanan. Okay, we'll pause over here. We'll continue the rest of this Mishnah Berurah tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This was limud HaTorah should be megan on God's Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Hashem should send Yeshua for us, Parnas and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Biaskal Tzedek the Meher of Yameinu. Amen. Be well.